when you lose a job, you can't help feeling rejected. Realizing that this happens to every human being. You're not a person with the mark of Cain on their forehead, like you're now some bad person. You're a person who has experienced woundedness.
On today's episode, we're going to explore an important topic, something that so many people experience but very few talk about, and that's shame. Shame shows up in all kinds of ways. And right now, so many people are feeling that quiet ache after a layoff, after a long stretch of unemployment, or after being rejected from a role that they really, really wanted. No matter how it shows up, shame has a way of making us feel small. It keeps us silent when what we really need is connection and compassion, especially for ourselves. Today, I'm joined by my friend and former colleague, Dr. Helen Riess, a Harvard psychiatrist, empathy expert, and founder of Empathetics, a company that teaches the science and skills of empathy to leaders, teams, and organizations. We're talking about what happens emotionally when your work, your identity, or your sense of worth feels shaken, and how empathy can help us find our way back to ourselves. If you're in a season of transition or know someone who is, this one is for you. Big change doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it starts with a single step. That's why I'm excited to host leaders, innovators, great thinkers, and everyday people sharing their stories and practical insights you can use right now. Wherever you are in your journey, whether you're just starting out, looking to make a pivot, or ready to reinvent yourself, you'll find both information and inspiration right here. This is Giant Steps, and I'm Leilani Brown. Good morning. My name is Leilani Brown. I'm CEO of Giant Steps, and joining me here today is Dr. Helen Riess, and I'm so happy to have you having this conversation with us today, Helen. You're not only a globally recognized expert on many things, including empathy, but also a dear friend. So welcome to the Giant Steps podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So before we get started and talk about a range of things that we're going to talk about today, could you describe for everyone what it is that you do for your vocation and how that relates to our conversation today?
Sure. So I'm a psychiatrist. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And about 13 years ago, I founded a company called Empathetics because of my strong belief of how important empathy is, not just in healthcare jobs, but in every job, to help us connect with one another and treat each other humanely and fairly.
So when did you realize that empathy was your jam? You wrote this wonderful book, The Empathy Effect, and you really have taught me a whole lot about empathy and self-empathy too. But when did you discover it as a lever for mental health and wellness?
Well, I had been in clinical practice for a number of years, and I worked with young women with eating disorders for a long time. And I recognized that when people were perceived as contributing to their own problem, like, why don't you just eat? Or why don't you stop, purging? There was a lack of empathy from many providers because they didn't understand the psychological underpinnings of the behavior. And in my work and my training, I learned the power of empathy because when you truly try to understand what is going on in a person and not just try to address outward behavior, that's when the magic happens. And so empathy became the tool, really, of connection and seeing a lot of people get better. My team at Mass General was answering the question, can you teach empathy? And our research showed that you absolutely can. It's not, you either have it or you don't. So that started my career trajectory.
I love that. I love that. Can you give us some perspective about some of the emotional landmines that come up when you're experiencing a job loss? And I know that we probably have different types of audience members that are listening to this. So we have people who are early in their career, sort of 1 to 5 years out of school and maybe experiencing it for the first time. You also have some mid-career people who may have been at a job for a very long time and didn't see it coming. or are dreading that it's coming, or seeing their friends or coworkers leave? What are some of the emotions that come up as part of a job loss and the need to move forward?
Well, this is a really important question because many times when people lose their job, they also lose their community, and all of a sudden they're by themselves with only their worst punishing thoughts and feelings.
Mm.
And one of the most profound and common feelings is a deep sense of shame. Shame is a very, very painful emotion. It started as a social emotion to keep people in line, and so when you do really egregious things, you can feel a sense of shame because you get a lot of social feedback that what you did in public should not have been done. And so shame is not universally a bad emotion, but it becomes quite toxic when people don't know how to process a job loss. And especially young people who have lost a job early in their career, they are also experiencing a loss of identity because they've just moved from a student role or maybe a previous minor job to a professional role.
Mhm.
And losing your job can trigger identity insecurity, and it makes mistakes feel like personal failures.
Mhm.
And if there's a lack of experience in a new job and you lose your job, you can also start to really experience shame around, I should have known more, I didn't know enough, I should have, prepared more. And instead of seeing this as maybe a workforce reduction need, or perhaps you were hired for a role that they can no longer afford, it becomes deeply personal. And people also have unrealistic expectations about just how much they ought to know. And
Mhm.
if they lose their jobs, they can make it all about me.
I want to stick with this notion of shame because I think that's the word that just kept coming to me. And also with you and I in our early conversations, this sense of personal responsibility that you could have done something a little differently, and that you are worried that people are looking at you, that you might have done something a little bit differently. And then it makes it harder to move forward.
You're absolutely right, Leilani, because shame becomes part and parcel with having your first job.
Hmm.
Because most people in their first job believe they ought to know a whole lot more than they actually do. And
Hmm.
that leads to a fear of asking for help. They're afraid that asking for help will make them appear incompetent. Um, and sometimes people overcompensate by being, a know-it-all, or by being overly helpful, stepping in where it's really not in their lane, just to prove their worth. They can become perfectionistic and work long hours and overwork, which also can create a detrimental effect on their job performance. Um, People who feel insecure in their first job, they either overcompensate or sometimes they just become quite silent
Hmm.
and withdrawn. And when they get any kind of feedback, like this spreadsheet was wrong or there was a mistake here, they take it as a scorching criticism, not of I made a mistake,
Hmm.
I'm no good.
Hmm.
And so this shame-prone early career transition, if you then lose your job, you can see how everything just piles on
Hmm.
um, into a sense of inadequacy, and it's all about not being good enough.
Yeah.
And it's hard to maintain perspective.
Yeah.
And so there are things I think that workforce and employers need to do to help with this.
What are some of the things that people can do individually to overcome the obstacles or the paralyzing, the way in which shame can be paralyzing? What can some people do in doing it? You mentioned part of it is building community, uh, but who should be in that community? Let's start there.
Yes. So the role of mentors can't be underestimated. If you have a really good mentor, somebody who you know knows your worth, hopefully you can go turn to that person and say, I lost my job and I feel terrible. And, all the fear, I'll never get another one. This is such a, dark spot on my resume, and have a mentor just hear you out and normalize the experience.
Hmm.
Unless you started a job when you were 18 and have never been in the same job for 60
Right.
years, you probably lost a job here and there for various reasons. And
Hopefully,
yeah,
hopefully you love the
yeah,
job, by the way.
absolutely, because hopefully you've outgrown some jobs you had and
Yeah.
people realized, you're too talented for this. You need to
Right.
move on. Right. So, being able to form a relationship with a mentor and also some peers. So, some employers actually provide some resources for people who've lost their jobs, but not enough. Not enough of them do that to say, look, here's a person or a group to speak with. This wasn't about you. This was where we are in the organization. Building resilience even before any job loss, but knowing how to handle disappointment really should also be part of like every educational background.
Hmm.
Bad things are going to happen.
Hmm.
And I've actually personally done therapy with people who've lost their jobs who go to such a self-punishing place
Hmm.
and they haven't ever heard, if things don't work out, it's not your fault. Like, or, maybe you made a mistake and it's the biggest learning lesson of your life that you will look back on and say, I'll never make that mistake again.
Hmm.
So trying to reframe this into not the end of the world, but something that hopefully is shareable. And I find the most worrying sign is when someone completely isolates and withdraws, doesn't want to talk to anybody. I worry about those cases. And I'll also say that right after a first job loss, when the pain can be very stinging,
Hmm.
some people, will tell their friends and family, and immediately people say, "Oh, I can set you up with an interview with this person. Oh, you should talk to this person." And everyone's in helping mode,
Hmm.
not realizing that the person might need, a month or two or more
Right.
to just like sit with the shock of it, sit with the feelings, and hopefully when they're ready, start talking to somebody to stop the negative tyranny that
Yeah.
comes with the shame of it, to
Yeah.
actually thinking, how can I reframe this to be like maybe open up new opportunities that I've never thought of?
Yeah, you're leading me into so many questions. I have more questions, and at least two I want to go to. But as before I do, I want to remind people who are listening to this, we have a free ebook for audience members who may be looking for a new job or recently laid off. It's called Your Next Giant Reset, a career comeback guide. But the first chapter, Helen, is called Gathering Yourself
Hmm.
and not
Okay.
having, sort of this frenetic, approach to I have to find something else. Sometimes we need to center ourselves to unpack what just recently happened and sit with the experience. I think, and I'm not a clinician, I'm not a psychiatrist, but what I was trying to do was offer people in those first moments or days, weeks, or months, even an opportunity for self compassion and self empathy to get to a more practical and hopeful place. So let's say that you have two patients that have come into you to see you, and one is particularly challenged with it. What does that look like? And then one has successfully reframed. What does that look like?
The most difficult to recover often has a previous insult of not belonging, feeling that they failed at something. And so, I've seen people really tip into a serious depression, but it's almost never because you lost one job. It might be sitting on a deeper foundation of a failure or an insecurity. The cases that go better are when people start to use, reframing, uh, change the narrative in your head. Like, this is data. And often you'll say, "Did you really like that job?" and be like, not really. I really hated this. I didn't like that. And the people were like this. And so, I love this saying, most feelings are mutual. Like, maybe it just wasn't a good fit. And I get a laugh because
Yeah,
sometimes people realize, maybe it had status, it had a good salary,
right.
it had some kind of security. And you look at kind of, and I've seen this a lot in young people, which I think is really kind of precious. They are so committed to the organizational mission
Hmm.
that they'll put up with almost anything.
Hmm.
And this is especially true of young college people who want to come out and they want to change the world or they want to
Right,
be part of something that is like truly a human service.
right,
And just because you're offering a human service does not mean you are treating everyone in your organization
right,
humanely.
right. Because the organization is still an organization. It still has its management dynamics and all of those things, and you can be really disenchanted uh,
Yes,
through that experience.
but these mission-driven young people, I've seen them put up with incredibly difficult, especially if you go into the startup world where the whole organization isn't very secure. You can imagine how many mixed messages and different winds are blowing that have nothing to do with them, but
Yeah.
they will internalize. So, making sure they know that they're not alone and that everyone feels some shame when they lose a job. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know anyone who'd be like, yeah, I lost my job,
Right,
no big deal. I mean, there's always a sting because humans thrive on social connection and acceptance. And when you lose a job, you can't help feeling rejected.
sure.
And I love what you said a couple minutes ago about self-compassion, because realizing that this happens to every human being, like you're not some, person with the mark of Cain on their forehead, like
Mhm.
you're now some bad person. You're a person who has experienced woundedness,
Right,
right?
right,
And so many times an initial reaction is tremendous anger at the organization or at a boss, but that's really a stand-in for just feeling like, I've been rejected and it really hurts. And how do I treat myself with the same compassion that I would give if this happened to my friend,
right,
right?
right.
And so that way of reframing how you talk to yourself, um, sometimes it has to be modeled by a therapist or a
Mhm.
parent or a friend. It can be anybody, but you know, that self-empathy is a much stronger motivator for your next role and your next step than self-criticism.
Mhm.
So trying to get people to just change the self-talk.
Yeah. You also work with organizations. I know that you've worked with hospital systems, you've worked with police forces, you've
Mhm.
worked with different technology companies. All of them are experiencing in different ways reductions in force, mass layoffs, et cetera. What are some of the hallmarks of an organization that does it well, that, reduces their workforce with compassion and care and really allows for the people who leave to serve as ambassadors for it? I can remember one place that I left, they had a reduction in force, a mass reduction in force. And I was able to say, I was glad I was there and I was glad I left, and they treated me well on my way out. But what are some of the things that in your experience, or that you've seen, that are the hallmarks of those types of organizations?
When you treat people well, first of all, they want to stay. And
Mhm.
you've created a culture where people like working there. These same organizations, because they have valued people so much, when they have to let someone go, it's not a pink slip in your mailbox.
Mhm.
It's a conversation. And I think the most caring thing, especially with mass layoffs, is for a CEO or business leader, healthcare leader, whatever, educational leader, to share their own vulnerability. We are so sorry that this is where we are today. we would like to keep everyone. And to have people feel like there's genuine caring about
Hmm.
the impact on the workforce, because you do want these people to remember how they were let go.
Yeah.
Not, well, we had to do cost cutting and we're going to be slashing, 200 jobs starting next week. Go
Hmm.
talk to your HR officer. That is done far too many times.
Right.
I mean, people ended up in my office when I, was doing more clinical work, just blown away and, had poured their heart and soul into these companies to be just treated like you're just so expendable.
Right.
And I think the unintended harm, you can't even measure it.
Let's talk about you personally, if you feel comfortable. So, how did you start out right after college? What was your first job? Did you go straight to medical school, or could you take us back to some of your early career experiences?
You know, I got a job working in an adolescent center for young girls. They were mostly high school age. Because I knew I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and I thought, what a great opportunity to help young girls. And I went in there so optimistic and eager to help. And many of them were quite sullen. Like these were kids who'd had very traumatic stories, and I, was there wanting to talk, and they would be like ignoring me. And um,
Where was this?
it was in Concord, Mass.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember like having to make this whole adjustment. Like, not everybody wants your help here. Some of these kids are really, coming from such troubled backgrounds. And I learned the lesson of how long it takes to build trust.
Mm,
You just have to show up. Don't expect people to come pouring their hearts out.
hmm.
So I'm going to share one of my experiences of shame was so they had this van that they would take these 14 girls to their appointments in Boston. Now, I had never driven anything bigger than a Honda Civic. And the director was busy. Like normally he did the driving with this enormous vehicle. And I was there, I think like 3 days. And he said, I'm being pulled away with this emergency. Can you drive? And I'm like, yeah, I can drive. And he said, the girls need to go to their appointments in Boston. And then he showed me the van, and I was like, oh. And he goes, you're okay with this? And I'm like, yeah.
That is a big difference from a vehicle standpoint.
And I was too ashamed to say, uh, this is like I've never driven a thing this big before. And so I got on the highway, I got them to their appointment. I was so nervous. And then on the way back, I missed the exit to come back to Concord. And I drove like, I don't know, like 30 miles out of my way. I was so, and the girls were talking in the back. Anyway, I finally figured out how to turn around, how to get back. And then the next day, the guy said, you know,
It took you a while to get back.
no, he said, that tank shouldn't have been empty. I said, well, you just filled the gas tank. And
And for context, everyone, this is before cell phones. This is before GPS, right? I'm
oh,
assuming.
totally. No, we're back way back here. Yeah. And no, there was nothing like that. And so he said something about how the gas tank was almost empty and he didn't expect it. And I was too ashamed to say I missed the exit and I drove 30 miles. I
You
just
did.
acted like, oh. And then later on he said, I was so impressed when you said yes, you would drive that van. And he said, I thought for sure like you wouldn't do it. And so here I thought, I never knew that he realized this was asking too much of me, right? And if I had said, I was so nervous that I missed the exit,
Hmm.
like he might have said right away, I'm surprised you went at all. But
Right.
I sat with that like scorching feeling of like, oh, like, they must realize something went wrong. And
Yeah.
it to show like that was such a human mistake.
And you
So
went from fear
human.
to shame to pride because you were like, okay, I did this. I can do hard things.
But I'm bringing it up because I mean this happened. I don't want to say how many decades ago, but a lot. And I still remember that feeling of like having made that mistake and then costing them this tank of gas and whatever. And it just some self-compassion could go such a long way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just ask you this before we get ready to wrap. I have two questions for you. For anyone listening to this that is experiencing a job transition, a job loss, or is expecting one to come, what is one thing that you hope to leave them with, or some words that you hope to leave them with that might be a source of comfort, strength, or even inspiration?
Well, first of all, the point you made earlier is that we are in a time in an era right now with tremendous market volatility. And so you are in very good company if your job feels at risk, is at risk, and if you lose your job. This is just a massive time of belt tightening, insecurity, tariffs coming. Who knows what is that's going to do to the workforce. So to try to really see the broader context, like this is not so personal,
Hmm.
and already start to know who your trusted people are if anything should go wrong. Say you just make a mistake that you feel terrible about, but you're not getting fired. Like, is there someone you trust where you can just process it and kind of then let it go instead of having it pile up as like a series of mistakes that keep driving your self-esteem, into the ground.
Yeah,
So develop and choose your mentors carefully and cultivate those relationships.
cultivate some kind of community. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And learn some self-regulation, like how to calm yourself through breathing and also just knowing we are not prisoners of our minds. We can change our thinking,
Mhm.
right? And we can be kinder and gentler and try to say, if this thing happened, there's probably something better for me coming along. And that's a much more hopeful outlook than I'll never get a job again, or this means I'm marked for life, or, all these negative thoughts people have.
Well, Dr. Helen Riess, my friend, founder of Empathetics, psychiatrist, wonderful, wonderful woman. Where can people find you and find out more about you and your work and your book?
The Empathetics website is a great place to get more information. And my book, The Empathy Effect, is on Amazon and it's coming out in paperback on November 4th.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
Well, I've read the book and it's fantastic. We will link all of that information in the show notes. Helen, thank you so much for being with us and sharing so much of your knowledge and wisdom with our audience today.
Well, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Leilani.
Thank you.
Take care.
This podcast is a production of Giant Steps LLC, a company working at the intersection of strategy, culture, career, and education. I'm Leilani Brown, CEO and host of the show. Many thanks to Jaira Michael, our executive producer, and S. Maxwell Brown, producer and editor of this episode. You can learn more about our company at giantstepsllc.com. We hope you enjoyed this episode and others. Please be sure to follow, like, and share our show far and wide. Thank you for listening.